All right, hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to Seeing Purple. Not really sure how I'm going to follow up that because that was just amazing. But we'll do our best. All right, a little bit about me real quick. I'm a security consultant with VilePoint. This is pretty much what happens there. Crazy stuff, twerking, all sorts of fun stuff. I'm a member of MySec, as well as La Dosa Nostra. We're a collective of security professionals who are focused on teaching and helping the community out as much as possible. If you ever want to get a hold of me, best place is Twitter. That's my handle. So we're going to talk today about someone called Client Zero. Now, Client Zero was struggling. Last year, hypothetically, they underwent a merger and acquisition process. They were frightened. They were legitimately scared about this insider threat. They had heard the term thrown around, but they never really were concerned about it because everyone was happy, they paid really well. But now everyone was scared for their jobs, and rightfully so. Actually, at the time, certain files, like the fire list, had been shopped around, and a couple less ethical people there actually broke into it, but hypothetically. But there were billions at stake here. We're talking companies that were managing billions of dollars. So they came to us and they said, what sort of policies should we put in place? What sort of procedures should we implement in order to prevent this? How are we going to implement them? What should we do? And so we said, well, let's build a program around this. And so we decided to start first with the question why. And this is something that I don't think clients understand. And maybe you are at a company that may not fully embrace this concept. But Simon Sinek has a great TED Talk called How Great Leaders Inspire Action, completely unrelated to InfoSec. And he says, well, we need to start with the question why. And he builds this golden circle, is what he calls it. At the center of this circle is the question why, the motivation. Then we go to the how, which is the process. And then only once we get to the what do we have our product. The story in the parable that he used was that of Apple. Does anybody here know what Apple's slogan is? Other than close. Their slogan is think different. Now, whether or not they actually think different and, not rip off of Palm Pilot and all others, it's up for debate. But the point is that their entire existence is wrapped around that motto of think different. They understand the why. So how do we apply this to InfoSec? Well, why are they going to target us? In this case, it was make money, get intel, make maybe some short sales, or maybe just for fun. Maybe they just said, you know what? Screw this company in particular. I want them to fail. The other thing we want to ask ourselves as information security professionals, why is my company in business? Why is my client in business? Because until we understand the why they're in business, how are we going to know the what and the how of what we're going to protect? So obviously every business is in business to make money. That's a given. Are they there to provide a service? Are they there to produce a product? Are they there to hire people? But once we answer these questions, we can move on to the how. How will I protect them? Well, give me some examples. What do you guys use at work? Firewalls? Antivirus is probably one of the best investments you can make. No, I'm not going to even go there. DOS. Ooh. Yes, that is the correct answer. You not only do you win the internet. Here, do you want to? This isn't really mine to give, but you can have a marker. Exactly. And then the other how we want to ask ourselves is how are they going to attack us? Are they going to go after exposed services? Are they going to try and social engineer someone into opening, hypothetically, an infected Excel document leading to the exposure of the RSA seed? Who knows? But these are the questions we need to ask ourselves before we can finally get down to the what. What areas of the infrastructure are we going to protect? What are we going to do to protect these areas? And if you notice, we start at the top with critical business services. Then we go down to core infrastructure, server network. But the DMZ is crossed out. We want to focus the majority of our efforts where we have, the most control, and B, the largest signal-to-noise ratio. We want to minimize the noise and have the best intelligence that we can get. So the best way that I've been able to describe it, and this was generated in Microsoft Paint the day of Bsides Chicago, I think it turned out pretty well. But if you know, I think this best describes what we're trying to do here. We need to base everything off this why. Then we can do the how and the what, but by doing the why, it makes everything else that much easier. We can answer these questions much easier once we know the why. So the overall message that we're going for here is do something. It doesn't matter what you do, because what we're going to talk about today, this particular anecdote, probably isn't going to be specifically right for your company. Maybe analog-based security, in the way that everyone was discussing it, may not be right for your company. But the point is look into it. Embrace it. Do something. Don't just kind of sit around all depressed, like the poor robot, and mope and that blue team is dead. I saw that on Twitter the other day. Someone said, blue team is dead, everybody should just switch over to the red team and call it a day. And maybe they were joking, maybe they weren't, but the point is that it's not dead, nor is red team. We need to do something, and we need to innovate and basically get off our collective asses. So let's start with some definitions. I Googled definition meme, and this is what came up. I don't know. Someone had a good night. All right, so how many students do we have in the room? Students? 1, 2. Dude, come on, raise your hand. Yeah. And how many InfoSec professionals do we have? All right. Now, how many of you are blue team? Really? Nice. Let's look for the frowns. So, who are the blue team? The blue team can be your sysadmins, your network admins, your SIM analysts, your SIM administrators, your security engineers, everyone who is responsible for the protection and detection of a system. That is by far my favorite XKCD. For the most part, what we want to do is we want to look for two things. We want to be able to detect evidence of a compromise, or we want to be able to prevent a compromise or an attacker from achieving a specific goal or a specific stage in a threat model. And we can get detection capabilities, most SIMs, logs, that kind of thing. We can get preventative capabilities from vulnerability management, ACLs, firewalls, IPS, IDS, insert your alphabet soup of devices there. So we're going to talk, what we did for this client is that they instituted a SIM program. We took all the logs, we started correlating them, looking at them, and we were able to, for the most part, on most indicators that we tested, identify a compromise with a reasonably high level of certainty within about a few hours. Which is, at 496 days down to a few hours, is a fairly good increase, in my opinion. Then the other thing that we did is we instituted a VM program. So out of you blue teamers, how many of you guys actually have a good patch management program that you're happy with? Yeah, 2, 3. What's that?
Better patching.
Exactly. Heard that EMET does a pretty good job at that. So let's talk about our red teams now. How many red teamers do we have? That's it. There we go. So now, who are the red teams?
We're the green team. It's terrifying. You don't have a budget. It's really terrifying. Sorry.
What is it like to have a budget?
I'm on the clock, and we'll leave when we're drinking later tonight.
I'll send you a DM later on in the week. No, you know what? I'll ask Steve sometime when he's not on the clock. So,
He works for a living. It's not in marketing.
Fair enough. So, red teams are most well known for their security assessments. I'm assuming everyone who identified here as red teamer, mostly pen test? Social engineering, pen test, some sort of penetration is happening, and yes, feel free to laugh, haha. So, for the most part, pen tests are required as part of audits. There's this whole we break it, you fix it mentality. For example, when Eve goes and does her social engineering, she goes in and breaks the spirit of the people, gets the information she needs, and then gives the company, potential remediation. But the point is there's that whole we break it, you fix it mentality, and then the most important question is, how do we know it's working if it's never been tested? I mean, there's always the retest, but I mean, who wants to spend another $10,000? $20,000, $30,000, however much it costs for you to have that pen test done. Who wants to do that? Who can make that business case to have that done the next week, the next month, the next quarter? So that brings us down to security exercises. So you take an attack, you model it out, and you select a specific stage. And then you assume all the prior controls have failed. So let's say we're talking about persistence. We would try and make a persistent outgoing shell connection to see if we have the ability to detect or prevent this. And it gives you a measure of control. There's minimal risk because you're not using tools, you're replicating a behavior. Because the goal that we want for this team is not to just block tools like antivirus does. We want to block the general behavior of an attack, of a compromise. So here's the main differences between an exercise and an assessment. They both use real techniques. They both use real objectives. But we're modeling a real attack as opposed to actually executing it. And in exercise, we can test our controls as well as our response time. So, yeah, what's up?
Would we be able to block certain behavior based not on the tools that they use, but on the system calls that the tools make?
Absolutely. You have host-based intrusion detection systems such as OSSEC. Actually, OSSEC's the big one. But yeah, if you're interested in that, take a look at OSSEC. It actually is a major part of one of the products that are out there called Alien Vault, which is kind of a SIM, kind of not. They call it a Unified Security Manager, but it does SIM stuff, it does NIDS, but it also uses OSSEC and integrates it really heavily. So, how many of you are familiar with the whole conflict of red versus blue? So, in your guys' opinion, what's better, red team or blue team?
Yes.
Thank you, Eve. Thank you. So, you guys know Rooster Teeth? If you notice, I've been using a lot of red versus blue metaphor here. Took me a lot of time. All these images, by the way, are courtesy of Rooster Teeth. They had this whole, show online, actually I think it's still going on, called Red versus Blue. And then eventually there was always this little purple guy that was hanging around in some of the episodes, and that really kind of spoke to me about the ongoing quagmire that we have between red and blue. It's always, well, I broke your system. Well, I stopped you. Well, I broke you. It's really counterproductive. All of us are working to the same goals, right? We all want better security. We all want to make our system secure. Otherwise, why are we here? I'm assuming we all love our jobs. Because if you didn't, you sure as hell wouldn't be here right now. So I think Raf Mudge summed it up best in the Bsides Detroit 2012 podcast. He said, my idea of hacking is taking the tactics, techniques, and procedures that different threats are using today and using them against organizations when they have a mature program to understand exactly how our controls stand up when exercised by a sophisticated thinking adversary. So that's a lot of text I just read that I put up there. Let's break it down real quick. So we're taking the actual tactics, the techniques and procedures. We don't have to necessarily use the tools. Tool is mentioned nowhere in there. Using them against our organizations, so we're testing, we're exercising. And then when they have a mature program.
That's kind of the rub.
What's that?
The mature program is the rub.
And there it is. This requires a mature program. Your company has to want security, and that's something that we're going to talk about near the tail end of this, is a communication plan. We need to, as a community, to communicate better the importance of this. Because, I mean, if you go to management and you say, hey, we need security. Why? Well, because we need it. We could get breached. It's not really quantifiable. So we'll talk about that near the tail end. So the concept that we have around the Purple Team is you take knowledge of your security, you take the knowledge of your weakness, and then you can put them together. And you use the blue team to inform the red team. You use the red team to inform the blue team. Just like what they was talking about before. You have a feedback loop. And you use this to increase the security of your team. And this isn't just limited to InfoSec teams. You have to have a knowledge of how your business functions. You shouldn't just be doing this unilaterally. You should be involving different business units. Maybe just a SME from accounting. Maybe a SME from human resources. But so that way you know what's important to the business, so you know what to protect. And in doing so, we can take our organizations from something that looks like this little guy in the center, to blocking all sorts of APT missiles. And if you're drinking, take a drink. So here, I'm going to outline 4 goals. We want to create realistic scenarios. We want to identify how we would protect ourselves against those scenarios and how we would respond. We want to test each individual scenario, and then we test our environment. And this is how we do it. We threat model, we exercise, we pen test, and then we exercise some more.
I mean, the only problem is convincing management that it's all working.
Yeah.
Costs a lot of money.
Yes and no. Threat modeling can be very, very cost effective if done right. So this is basically what we're doing. We've got another beautiful paint triangle here for you, but threat modeling gives you a broad range, and as you go down, you reduce the number of scenarios that you have to test, and you're also increasing your cost. Reduce the scenarios, increase the cost as you go down. In short, we want to think of our infrastructure as a citadel, as a fortress, as Wolf said it, like a chocolate-coated candy. We want what's in the center to be most protected with mitigating layers of control outwards and everything placed appropriately. So threat modeling actually in this concept requires the least amount of time and effort. You do 1 model weekly, and then you can build a portfolio. So you can take this to your management and you can say, hey, look, in the time that I had, I built up this level or this portfolio of potential attacks. I've built metrics around this of where our current detective and preventative controls lie. This is where we stand. If we get this for X amount of money, this is where we will be. So you can show measurable progress. So how do we choose our model? Well, there's a couple different ones. There's the SDLC threat model, Stride. If you're drinking, here's another one for you, the Cyber Kill Chains of Doom, RTM, JPEG, etc. from Lockheed. And then MISEC's been working on a threat model process called attack paths. I know it's kind of weird, but I think I'm going to go with attack paths for today. So the attack path model looks something like this. 8 different steps, very flexible. You don't need every one of them. You start from the objective and work your way up. And then at each step, you document your ability to detect and prevent. And in doing so, you build a story. You build a story about what's going to happen to your network. What's going to happen when when controls 2 through 4 fail. And my boss, Wolfgang, gave an excellent talk on this at Bsides Chicago. That's the link right up there to Adrian's site. And so I'm not going to go heavily into this because that's kind of his territory. But you can do these quickly, you can do these cheaply, and you can use these to show measurable progress. So that's what we did for our client. We went through and we documented the insider threat. We said, all right, we're going to assume that these levels of controls have failed because they have already been granted the appropriate access. And they're now going to leak the information up. They're going to take this entire private directory, zip it up, and shoot it up to the cloud. How do we prevent this? Well, or at least detect this. Not a really good way to prevent, but so what we did is we added this to their SIM. And in short, what we're doing here is we're looking for a flow that goes from local to remote, has a bias on the local side, meaning that an upload's going on, and that's been over 100 megs. And then we populate a list of known Dropbox sites, cloud storage sites, Dropbox, Mega Upload, or Mega, or whatever it is now, OneDrive, etc. So we took it to the tabletop. We gathered our stakeholders. We gathered people who had stakes in the system, and we said, okay, how would we respond? How would you guys respond in the event that this alert triggered? And now this is slightly more expensive. Having a table is a plus. I put requires on there. You can do it standing. People tend to want to sit. Exactly. So we got them all together in the room and we said, okay, somebody's just uploaded 100 megs of data to Dropbox. Go. Nobody had any idea what to do. They were like, well, do we call, who do we call? They had no idea who to call. I'm going to call the internet. I'm going to go call the internet and we're going to get them on it. We're going to get the cyber police. If you're drink, yes. Thank you. Nobody plays the game anymore.
Can't hear. Keep a tally and we'll take care of it later.
So the point was that nobody knew the escalation path. Nobody knew who to send the information to. So what we were able to do is we were able to set up the appropriate documentation for what I like to call the buck pass. Who does the buck get passed to until action's taken? It sounds kind of lame, but that's really what it is. I mean, but seriously, a communication plan is paramount. If you don't know who you're talking to, who you should tell about this, and you're just like, well, maybe we should just call the FBI. That's going to lead up to a lot of issues. And a lot of confusion. And as they were talking about earlier, you increase your exposure time. I do it on time. Close enough. So we moved on to exercises. So they are more expensive because they require more time of the admin. And then you take the more likely of the scenarios that you've already generated. So remember, we've now gone from a whole portfolio of scenarios, and we're drilling down from our tabletop, and now we're at the exercise level. So we're going to take the one that we think we did the worst on. In this case, it was the one with the communication plan. And we perform these monthly. So, for example, what we would do is we take stage 4, we test our ability to connect out. Last year at Bsides Chicago, I gave a talk about how to create a remote access toolkit, or a little remote access one-liner, essentially, with Bash. You could give that to your admin, and you could say, here, go ahead and run this, and nothing bad really happened. I mean, it's just Bash, and there's no RMs, it's all just network Bash commands. As opposed to saying, here, run this exploit, run Black Hole Toolkit on your server, and let me know how that goes. So, we have minimal risk to the infrastructure. So we wanted to test the ability to upload a large amount of data. What this command will do right here is this will create a file called test in the root directory, and it's just going to create a file of zeros. This thing takes about 2 seconds to generate a 1.1 gig file that you can use for testing. Now, if you're trying to do FTP, or SFTP, we found this out actually, it doesn't actually trigger it because of the way it compresses, and it just says, there's, a billion zeros in here. And then nothing triggers, and it was very depressing. Actually, that takes a really long time. We just ended up catting, yes, catting.
Cats.
It's funny you should mention that because we took 15 log files and catted them all together.
Did you MK FIFO that?
There may or may not have been FIFO pipes involved. But the long and short of it, this is what we're looking for with our exercises. This would pass an audit for a physical security. You have access controls on your door. In theory, let's say this is the door to your server room. In theory, only authorized personnel can get through that door.
Fire your auditor.
Checkbox security. It's the beauty of it. So this is exactly what we're looking for. Anybody need the keys on the door? No, we're running fast. Cool. So we move on to assessments. If you notice, they're getting progressively more active. There's more time and effort involved. More expensive in terms of time and political capital. If a pen test goes wrong, you're screwed. If you're the one who authorized it, and you take down a business for, say, a day, your ass is on the line, or your butt's on the line, sorry. But the key about a pen test is that you want to create targeted scenarios to test. You don't want someone to come in and say, okay, I'm going to test you. They come in, they jack into your network, they perform an ARP cache poison, they say, here, I got your domain admin hash. You're vulnerable. Thanks. Now give me $10,000. You want them to test a scenario. You want them to test a story. And so for example, what they said was, we want you to attempt to exfiltrate data along this path. If you can't go wild and try and exfiltrate that data, but we want you to test this path. We want you to go after this particular objective. For example, the goal was from an external access, as an external actor, with no social engineering, exfiltrate the PII of individuals that we have information on. They had DLP, they had SSL, maybe bad example. They had all sorts of fun devices. So we tested the insider threat. We did a wireless network pen test. We drove up into their driveway, and we sat outside, and we found out they had a guest wireless. So we extracted the hash, WPA2. Oh, we really are getting into this. They had a one-to-one NAT on their domain controller on the guest Wi-Fi, which was hilarious because instead of setting their DHCP to go to, for example, 8.8.8.8, they had a couple executives that still wanted to bring in some of their own devices. And so what they did is they said, fine, well, we need to have access to the internal DNS servers, so we're just going to go ahead and put this on the wireless network. And they just did a one-to-one NAT. There was no 53 forwarding. There was no firewall. It was just there. Then we played around with it a little bit more, and we found that there was an RPC null bind, meaning that we could bind and query that domain controller for information with no user and with a null user and a null password. Now, we couldn't get the domain admins, but we got a list of 906 some odd users. There's a Metasploit auxiliary module that will test the username and the username as password. We didn't find one account. We found 5. Not 2, 5 accounts that we used. So we pulled that down, found a domain admin that had something interesting in the comment section. In particular, it looked a little bit like a password. It was a password. From there, all we had to do, it was trivial to go into their document storage system, start pulling documents, print them to PDF from the print server, and then just save them locally. We didn't even have to exfiltrate out. So, by closing any one of these, we would have been unable to successfully break into their system. But these all could have been found through the appropriate threat model, through the appropriate exercise. See? So that's why we do this. That's why we build these teams up, so that way you can't combine these tiny little vulnerabilities into one giant vulnerability because you've thought of it. Or you've at least thought that someone is going to try and execute that behavior. So we are running really well on time. So we're going to talk a little bit about building the program, and then we can go to any sorts of questions and or trolling from those two over there, or three over there, I'm assuming. I know, right? It's just horrible of me to assume that. So where do we start? Well, we want to start by gathering threat intelligence. We want to, if you're a member of one of the Isaacs, FS Isaac, ES Isaac, I think they're starting a retail Isaac now. You can get some use out of it. Usually you get a list of IPs. InfraGard is another great one to get a list of IPs from, if you like IPs. But you want to understand the current threats that are going on your business. So if you are, let's say, Target or a Target-like company, and you saw that one of your competitors were breached, you want to start looking into those types of attacks against you. The other thing you want to do is you want to start threat modeling. You want to identify what in your environment has the appropriate controls, what does not have the appropriate controls, and then to shore that up as much as possible. And that's when you start getting your buy-in from management, when you move to tabletops, when you move to exercises, when you move to assessments. When you have the metrics, you can say, this is the threat, these are the threats that our companies are facing today. We've modeled these threats, and we found that we have X amount of coverage. If we do X, Y, and Z, we can increase this coverage. Do we have the ability to go ahead? Cool. And then we can start going through tabletops. We can start working through everything else that we talked about. And to do so, Steve Fox, Secure Lexicon, has a great plan that he's developed for communication, especially in business. And these are the 5 words that he gave me when I asked him for what it was in 5 words. It needs to be relevant, distinct, credible, benefit-driven, aligned with strategy. They're buzzwords. But the point is that it needs to be something that your boss can understand, something that's different, something that you haven't gone to him 1,000 times and just repeated the same thing. You need to be considered an SME. You need to be the one that your boss respects and actually believes. It needs to show benefit to the company. It needs to benefit the company in some way, measurably. And that kind of goes along with the aligned with strategy. These 4 support the aligned with strategy. And if you need additional reading, that's actually a link to Pixar's 22 criteria for a compelling story. It's actually fascinating. Have you ever watched anyone here seen Toy Story? Yeah.
Would that be useful in social life?
Absolutely.
Yeah, are you telling me to click shit?
It's an Imgur link.
God, when I click on it, it's not going to be long for you.
I'm actually a bigger fan of Goatsy myself. But. So this is the graphic that Steve uses in his training. We need to have the appropriate position. We need to make sure that our timing is correct so that we don't go to our boss and say, hey, we need to go spend $100,000 right as the company has lost 25% profit in the last quarter. Probably not a good idea. We need to make sure we have the power to do so. We can't be a junior level employee going to a vice president saying this is what we need to do. We need to make sure it benefits our company. And we need to make sure that when we bring this up, that we have everybody in the room who needs to be in the room to make that decision. So that way we're not telling the same story 3 different times. Because I don't know about you guys, when I was a kid, we played a game called Telephone. And, you tell someone something, then that person tells someone something else, and then they keep going. And eventually it's something completely different than what you started with. So these 4 aspects are what create a proper position for your argument. So overall, we go back to this whole concept of doing something. This is what we did at Client Zero. This is an idea that I had that I've been working on for a few months now. It's probably not going to be right for your company in particular. But what is right is to investigate things like this. Investigate ways to provide a more proactive defense, to combine your two teams, to create these feedback loops. Do something. Because then everybody can be all happy and stand together. And there's no red, there's no blue, there's only badass Spartans in a, 15,000th century suit of armor. All right, so any questions?
Any other questions?
Yes, Eve?
Think of something, give them all.
Oh, there's another question.
Oh, look.
Oh, Amanda.
Could you explain a little bit more about
How do I remove McAfee from
That is an excellent question. Now, Amanda's question was, how do you update Windows? It is a very complicated process. How many of you here are familiar with Linux or using any sort of real operating system?
What's a Linux?
Anything not Windows. So what you're supposed to do is in Windows, you're supposed to go into the control panel and click Windows Update. That does not work. That will brick your system.
in production?
Always in production through the KVM. Are there any other real questions? Yeah.
Is there a benefit for sysadmins to learn the techniques and stuff that, and the actual tools that attackers are using or pen testers are using? So we can go from doing a pen test, an external pen test by an external company yearly, to doing an internal pen